In Western liberal democracies, yes, even those that may not necessarily exist in the geographic West, freedom of speech is considered one of the most paramount of human rights. In America, the First Amendment to the Constitution states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. In Canada, Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms states that everyone has the following fundamental freedoms. A. Freedom of conscience and religion. B. Freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. C. Freedom of peaceful assembly. And D. Freedom of association. The UK, Australia, and New Zealand don't have explicit free speech laws, but there are precedent-setting court cases that cover free speech rights. And in the case of the UK, when the European Convention was incorporated in 1998, its Article 10 guaranteeing freedom of expression became part of the Human Rights Act. And I'm sure with Brexit, this will probably be one bit of legislature that the Brits keep around. I can keep going down the line here. Japan, freedom of assembly and association as well as speech, press, and all other forms of expression are guaranteed. No censorship shall be maintained, and so on. South Africa, everyone has the right to freedom of expression, which includes freedom of the press and other media, freedom to receive or impart information or ideas, etc., etc. France, Germany, the list goes on. Of course, repressive nations like the People's Republic of China or Iran also pay lip service to the notion of free speech in their legal code, but you can generally tell if a particular nation really means it or not based on the wording of the passage in question, if not the actions of the government. Say what you will about the free speech problems of America or Canada or whatever, but nobody's going to believe you about freedom of speech, Iran, when you lock up journalists and make blasphemy against Islam a punishable offense in your code of laws. Freedom of speech has become such a cornerstone of modern liberal democracies, in my opinion, for two reasons. One, because it's a right that's actually relatively easy, though not painless, to afford to the populace. And two, because generally speech cannot actually cause any harm. It's just speech. Words, usually. But also pictures or art or ideas. These things, by themselves, usually can't hurt people. Therefore, it's no surprise that limitations on freedom of speech often revolve around instances in which speech actually can hurt other people. For example, in the case of slander, a person's speech may be used to spread falsehoods about somebody else, damaging their reputation, their business, their personal relationships, and so on. Or the case of classified information, where a person's speech may let loose a classified secret that may cause harm to other people down the line, if the information reaches the wrong hands. Or in the case of perjury, where a person lies under oath in court. Or in the case of public security, where somebody's speech only serves to generate real-world harm with no other reason for its existence. The common example comes to mind of shouting fire in a crowded theater, where no fire exists, in order to cause a stampede of people that may injure each other or damage property in their mad dash to safety. But all of these limitations on freedom of speech must be proven for them to be legitimate. Most slander laws, for example, require it proven that the perpetrator of the slander knew that they were speaking a falsehood. To spread slander unknowingly, thinking it was actually the truth, is not enough. But then we get to the other common limitations on freedom of speech. Obscenity is a big one that tends to make people scratch their heads. Obscene content is something that offends the morality of the specific time and place in which the content finds itself. It is therefore highly subjective. Pornography was once considered obscene by the Western world and was largely banned despite freedom of speech laws. And yet today, porn is one of the biggest industries of all time, solely because the definition of obscenity changed. It is therefore no surprise that when somebody's freedom of speech is restricted due to a charge of obscenity, there's usually some level of public backlash. There's also two other instances that find themselves to be related: incitement and threats. Incitement is speech designed to cause others to commit violence or some other crime. A threat is speech meant to convey intentions of violence by the speaker to an intended victim. Both are common restrictions of free speech, however the degree in which the speech is restricted varies wildly between nations. For example, in the US, the true threat doctrine is used to determine the difference between a threat made in jest and a true threat, using the context of the speech. However, in some countries, all threats are considered to be illegal, regardless of context. And right at the bottom of the barrel, we've got stuff like hate speech. Broadly interpreted by a lot of different governments, it can range from advocation of genocide against any identifiable group in Canada, to forbidding communication which is hateful, threatening, or abusive, and which targets a person on account of disability, ethnic or national origin, nationality including citizenship, race, religion, sexual orientation, or skin color in the UK. All of these restrictions on free speech, from the reasonable to the ridiculous, have the same issue. they can be exploited by unscrupulous people for nefarious purposes. And the more ridiculous the restriction is, the more it can be exploited. Slander may be a reasonable restriction, but, for example, somebody who has knowledge of crimes committed by powerful people but little evidence may simply choose to stay silent because the restriction of slander on their speech carries a high penalty. We saw this chilling effect in action when Milo Yiannopoulos refused to reveal who the pedophiles he knew were on the Joe Rogan podcast.
That's a guy.
You know, I lived in Hollywood a while ago.
Did you?
Briefly. And,
did you go to one of his parties?
I went to other people who I won't name of a similar stature in Hollywood. I went to their boat parties and to their house parties and things, and some of the things I have seen have beggared belief.
Yeah? Can you give us like a...
Well, just... I don't want to be indiscreet about specific people.
Right, you don't have to do that.
It's going
just dance around the facts.
Yeah, dangerous, but I can tell you the truth without dropping anyone in it.
Okay.
I mean, some of the boys there were very young. Very young.
And this is really recently?
I don't remember... No, like, I don't know, 8 years ago. I don't remember...
Statute of limitations.
I don't remember whether I ever met Bryan Singer or whether I even knew who he was then. But I knew other people of similar stature, as I say, and there were some very young boys around at that time. There was a lot of drugs and a lot of...
twinks.
A lot of twinks taking drugs and having unsafe sex with older men, and some of these boys were very young.
What did you think about...
Desperate for a job, you know.
But, okay, slander's mostly alright. But how about the others? How about obscenity or hate speech? What kind of awful blowbacks have these restrictions suffered? Well, I don't really know where to begin with this one. It's hard to walk down the street without tripping over one. How about the Wiltshire police spending its time tracking down the people who spew abuse on Twitter, even as the official figures regarding crimes committed by immigrants show that Wiltshire has the second highest rate of rapes, where the suspect is an immigrant, in all of Britain? Or how about Count Dankula's arrest for the crime of publishing offensive material because he taught his girlfriend's pug how to perform the Nazi salute on command, as a prank to annoy her? Or how about the UK's Digital Economy Bill, which, among other things, restricts UK access to online pornography and outright bans some forms of niche porn as obscene? How about Australia doing the same thing, equating porn of flat-chested, of-age girls with child pornography? In my opinion, porn is one of the canaries in the coal mine regarding free speech and free expression. Or how about in Canada, where Kevin Johnston's been charged with a hate crime? Well, let's look into the details of this specific case. The charges come after a lengthy investigation into numerous incidents reported to police, involving Kevin Johnston and concerns information published on various social media sites. Peel Police said in a news release Monday. Johnston, age 45, was released on bail after a brief appearance in court Monday. The conditions of his release included an order to have no contact with 3 people whose names are under a publication ban. He was also ordered to stay 100 meters away from any mosque or Muslim community center in Ontario, except for when traveling on the road. He is best known for his strong views about the Muslim community, having opposed the construction of a mosque in Meadowvale, offered prize money for videos of students praying on Fridays, and protested against the federal anti-Islamophobia motion M103. Last year, a story published on the Mississauga Gazette site resulted in the local mayor filing a hate crime complaint with Peel Police. It was not immediately clear if that complaint prompted Monday's charges. In a multicultural and inclusive province like Ontario, the promotion of hatred stands in direct opposition to our fundamental values of equality and diversity. Hate divides people and communities, Attorney General Yassir Naqvi said Monday. Well, I'm sure it does, but this article's got a lot of pontification and not much substance on the actual crimes he's been charged with. Let's take a closer look. Opposing the construction of a mosque. That's not necessarily hateful, no more than it would be opposing the construction of a church, or really any building. It might be stupid, because private land should be able to be used by the owner in whatever way they like, but it's not hateful. Offered prize money for videos of students praying on Fridays? That's quite the claim. What does he have to say about it?
These people are going out of their way to allow Islamic prayer in public schools, forcing girls to sit in the back of the room during those prayers and denying menstruating girls even access to the room itself. This is what is happening in Canada right now. And these sermons that are going to be offered are allowed to be offered in Arabic. And the people that are being paid to watch over them also speak Arabic and are most likely Muslim themselves, meaning that the sermons are going to be full of anti-Jewish, anti-Christian, anti-infidel, and kafir rhetoric. I am offering $1,000 of my own money, cash reward, for any of you out there that can sneak a camera into any of these mosqueterias or mosque stages or mosque gymnasiums and get me the footage if it leads to any hate speech, because we will have it translated. I don't just have Sandra Sullivan. I have numerous Arabic speakers now, some of them Muslim, willing to translate these Arabic sermons. If we find any hate speech in there, and you're kind enough to tell us the student's name, the school, and the date you recorded it, it's $1,000 cash. I will hand it to you, and I'll even let you wear a mask when I do so.
Oh, it's supposed to be a video of praying students specifically within a school so that the sermons can be translated to see if they have hate speech towards Jews or Christians or non-believers, so that it can be publicly known if young Muslims in Canada are being covertly indoctrinated into hatred. That's quite a far cry from the Sun's sneak cameras into a mosque be disruptive or bigoted implication in its article. Protesting the federal anti-Islamophobia motion M103? Protesting a motion, or any move of government, is not a crime, let alone a hate crime. And allowing protest against the government to be redefined as hate speech is possibly the steepest slippery slope our civilization could ever face. Publishing a story on the Mississauga Gazette? I'm sure we could find a copy of some of his writing there that might be applicable. Boy, he sure writes a lot about lacrosse. Over half of his articles published are about the sport. But what's this? A letter to the Canadian trader Teresa Armstrong of the NDP? Let's read it. I would like to congratulate you on being another one of the many Canadian politicians who are guilty of the crime of high treason. Islam is at war with us. They don't even hide that fact. And you are assisting Islam to defeat Canada. How dare you be so anti-Canadian as an elected member of provincial parliament? How dare you be so anti-freedom as to try to dictate to me and the other 35 million Canadians you are supposed to be protecting that October is now the month of our greatest enemy? Holy shit. From a lacrosse enthusiast to this. What did Teresa Armstrong even do? Oh, she introduced a bill into the Ontario Provincial Legislature that made October 2016 Islamic Heritage Month. Alright. Stupid. Doesn't necessarily sit well with me personally, but I'm not about to lose my hair over it. The rest of Johnston's article, as well as a lot of his videos on YouTube, are in the same vein as this. He's vocally anti-Islam and pro-personal liberty. He's Christian, but supports secularization of Canada's schools. He's extremely inflammatory, at times even insulting. I don't think he's particularly smart either, but hateful? I don't think so. I will not partake in honoring for 31 days the doctrine of Islam that dishonors women and kafirs, you, me, and everyone else who is not Muslim. Islam's level of intolerance is unmatched in all human history, and I have far too much love in my heart for Canada to allow you to force me to be part of it. Is this hyperbolic? Yes. Is it meant to provoke or offend? Absolutely. Is it factually accurate? For the most part, I think so. Is it a hate crime? No. Doubly so because it is factually accurate. If we allow the truth to be considered a hate crime because non-offense is considered to be more socially valuable than tackling real problems, then we have failed as a civilization. In any case, all of this stuff talks about free speech in relation to governments. Governments may or may not protect the free speech rights of its citizens, either on paper or in practice. Governments may place restrictions, both reasonable and ridiculous, on those free speech rights, and the citizenry may either rebel against them or accept them. Everything so far has been regarding the government's involvement in speech, and therefore serves to set the stage for what I personally believe is an equally important discussion: the free speech rights between private entities. A private entity, for the purposes of this video, is anything not a government. Individual people, companies, YouTube channels, social media accounts, religious groups, political parties, organizations, and collectives of all types. For this conversation, let's start small and expand upward as we go. There's a lot of discussion right now regarding whose free speech and free expression rights reign supreme when two individual people are talking to each other. They both have free speech rights, of course. Neither can silence the other under normal circumstances. But at what point can one person restrict the free speech rights of the other person in the conversation? Well, we already know there's a few instances where the government can, but that's the government again. Is there ever a moral or ethical basis for one party to restrict the speech of another party in a personal conversation? I personally don't think there is. There may be some social consequence you must pay. For example, if you're revealing a secret told to you in trust, and you betray that trust. But freedom of speech legally doesn't mean freedom from reasonable consequences of asserting that right. This is about the time where somebody posts that old XKCD comic with the stickman narrator stating that people aren't telling you that you can't speak, they're just showing you the door because in the end, you may have the right to speak, but they have the right to not listen. And yet, the idea that speech may be restricted by an outside party due to offense is becoming more and more popular. At the time of recording this, there's a viral video that I just can't find. I think it's been deleted, but it's a short snippet of a debate between a university professor and I think a black male student. The professor asks him, "Where does my right to freedom of speech end?" The student replies, "When I am offended." And the professor is just so flabbergasted, he replies with a simple no. But to be honest, I don't need that specific video. Because this idea that the right to not be offended, whatever that is something that trumps the right to free speech, is an idea that's everywhere right now. Remember the Mizzou protesters? How they wanted to muscle out reporters who were covering it?
Hi, media. Can I talk to you?
No, you need to get out.
Well,
you need to get out.
No, I don't.
You need to get out.
I actually don't.
All right. Hey, who wants to help me get this reporter out of here? I need some muscle over here.
Remember those Yale students who protested a professor's point of view?
It is your job to create a place of comfort and home for the students that live in Silliman. You have not done that. By sending out that email, that goes against your position as master. Do you understand that? Then
no, I don't agree with that.
Then why the fuck did you accept the position?
Because
Who
I have
the fuck hired you?
I have a different
You
vision
should
than you.
step down. If that is what you think about being a master, you should step down. It is not about creating an intellectual space. It is not. Do you understand that?
Or remember the Evergreen hostage situation, where members of faculty were held captive during the student protest.
Ho ho! These racist teachers have got to go! Hey hey! Ho ho! These racist teachers have got to go! Hey hey!
Remember the many cancellations of Milo's on-campus seminars over his political stance? Remember that poor sap that was accosted by a black chick because he was a white guy wearing dreadlocks?
You're saying that I can't have a hairstyle because of your culture? Why?
Because it's my culture. You know what bothers me.
Do you know it was in Egyptian culture? Are you Egyptian? Nah, bro, I'm not.
Are you Egyptian?
No, but it doesn't matter.
Wait, where's Egypt? Tell me.
You know what, girl?
Where's Egypt?
Dude, go. You have no right to tell me what I can not get. Huh?
Where's Egypt?
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now.
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now.
Come back.
Get off of me.
Come back. Come back. Come back. You put your hands on me, no worries.
Well, like, you know, makes sense
your
and
hands
shit
on
because
me.
of what the hair I have? That's no reason, yo. I don't need your disrespect. I don't need your disrespect.
Why are you filming this?
For everyone's safety.
Remember literally anything Jordan Peterson has done? All of these instances have their root in this mythical right to not be offended. At Mizzou, the right to not be recorded by media was considered by the protesters more paramount than the rights of a free press. At Yale, the rights of students to feel safe and secure and untriggered was considered by the protesters more important than the content of the class the professor was teaching.
We're all stay quiet.
But the hard truth is, regarding a private discussion between people, or groups of people, there is no expectation that you may not be offended. There is no universal right to go through life without ever getting exposed to something uncomfortable. In fact, we would live in a sorry state if that were the case, as most growth happens during times of discomfort. It may be a popular idea among some young people right now, that you can restrict people's speech based on whether or not the receiver of that speech has a problem with it. But this concept is wholly corrosive to the idea of personal liberty, and we need only apply it to a larger scenario in order to understand why. What if your or my freedom of speech was restricted because what we said was found to be offensive or abusive or triggering not to a person, but to an organization? Organizations are private entities, like people. They do have rights under law as well. What if they also held the right to not be offended? What if I came out and said, don't eat Oreos, they're unhealthy?
No more Oreos, folks!
And rather than considering the factual merit of that statement, Nabisco decided to go after me for hate speech because their company was offended that I would say something so negative about them. What if a company decided to find the striking of its unionized workers offensive and press charges for hate crimes against that union? Or hey, what if criticizing a religion is hateful now as well? Religions are simply organizations based in faith. What if religions, like people and like organizations, also held the right to not be offended? What if it was actually a hate crime of unimaginable proportions when Martin Luther nailed his edicts to the door of the church? And what if the continued existence of any Protestant person is a constant act of religious bigotry towards the poor innocent Catholic Church? Well, would you look at that. Richard Dawkins' event cancelled over his abusive speech against Islam. Not his abusive speech towards Muslims, his abusive speech towards Islam. Not against people, against a religion, an idea. Maybe even a religious organization, in the same way that Catholicism is both a belief system and a power structure. But this is what his event was cancelled over, that his opinions and speech regarding Islam is abusive and offensive, not towards people, but towards the idea. Not that it even fucking matters, but what is this abusive speech anyway? Is it when he asked an imam what the penalty for apostasy in Islam was, and the guy sputtered all over his beard giving a response?
What is the penalty for leaving the Muslim faith?
To be honest, I cannot back that point up.
Dr. Mukaddam, what is the penalty for apostasy?
Before...
We keep coming down this apostrophe. Give us a quick answer on what is the bounds of apostrophe, and we'll come and do it.
You very well know, if it's an Islamic country, then the Sharia is very clear. Apostrophe is dealt with the death penalty.
Thank you, that's all I want to hear.
But what's the relevance?
Is it because that he thinks that Christianity is more tolerant than Islam, due to European culture having more of a skeptical nature than Arabic culture?
There's a belief that every word of the Quran is literally true, and it is, there's a kind of closed-mindedness there, which is I think, less present in the former Christendom. Perhaps because we've had long, I don't know quite why, but there's more of a historical tradition of questioning.
Is legitimate criticism abuse now, too? If we can just define and redefine all sorts of shit now, just on a whim, can we call the creators of movies and TV shows and video games a class of people separate on their own? And have the Southern Poverty Law Center brand that guy with the glasses as a hotbed of classist intolerance for their abuse of these poor directors and producers for criticizing their work? Because that's what this is, in the end. Islam is not a person. It's a worldview and a power structure. Its work is the radicalization that it produces within extremist Muslims. And criticizing that work is apparently abusive. All because people are starting to value the right to not be offended over the right to free speech. That's where this springs from. And no, I refuse to accept it. Let's shift gears a bit, because there are things to cover on the topic of free speech between private entities beyond just religion. Recently, Sid Alpha decided to begin moderating the comments on his YouTube channel. Now, before this, I legitimately respected Sid. I came to know his work during the Alex Maurer debacle, and I began branching out into his other content, regarding the exposing of game dev thieves on Steam known as asset flippers, and other work which I considered to be ethical in nature. He also prided himself, as I do, on having a completely unregulated comment section. His rationale for changing that is here.
There are certain well-defined and narrowly limited classes of speech, the prevention and punishment of which have never been thought to raise any constitutional problem. These include the lewd and obscene, the profane, the libelous, and the insulting or fighting words, those which by their very utterance inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace. It has been well observed that such utterances are no essential part of any exposition of ideas and are of such slight social value as to step to truth that any benefit that may be derived from them is clearly outweighed by the social interest in order and morality. So basically what fighting words are is when you directly insult someone or you deliberately make a comment just to get a rise out of them. So it's with that knowledge in hand that I did decide to begin moderating the comments section of my videos. You see, freedom of speech and freedom of expression comes with them that idea of the social contract, that there are consequences and stipulations for those precepts that all civilized people abide by. There are those, however, that rely on the anonymity that the internet affords in order to ignore that social contract and do whatever they want. What they are doing is not free speech, and it is most certainly not freedom of expression. There are social caveats to what we say and do that are required for a peaceful and prosperous society. Now, this is something that people do not wish to see brought onto my comments section at all. I would say they don't want them brought onto the internet in period, except that moderation is common practice on most sites. Steam, Twitch, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, all of them abide by that social contract to lesser or greater degrees. And it is a fact that, for a time, I had considered any form of moderation on my channel to be censorship when that is not actually the case.
Here's the guidelines he lays out in the description of that very same video. And of course, the same problems that apply to the government restricting free speech apply here. Abusive content and personal attacks towards a person or group of people. Sure, sounds good. But how long until this snuffs out actual criticism? Racist content, shock value content, derogatory terms. Sure. But how long until you start banning comments that are clearly jokes because somebody somewhere might be offended? Remember, people are starting to demand the banning of words like stupid now, because they are considered to be offensive slurs against those who lack intelligence privilege. Yes, this is a thing. And we only need to look up the ladder to see the end result. Jim Sterling and Total Biscuit, though still running huge channels, have become the laughingstock of the internet due to their extreme reactions to minor bits of speech. The question, "Are traps gay?" caused Total Biscuit to go into an ideologically fueled Twitter meltdown, over half of which has since been deleted, presumably because he noticed how dumb he was being. And since cancer probably took the man's spine along with his liver, he also went into his backlog and began deleting tweets that poked light at the pronouns discussion, most notably his identifying as a toaster. Yeah, I'm pretty mad about this, and here's why. Freedom of speech applies to all private entities. And yes, Sid Alpha and Jim Sterling and Total Biscuit, as well as their channels, are all private entities. They're all entitled to exercise their freedoms and shut down comments or throw people out of conventions that they operate. That's their freedom of speech in action. Yes, maybe it sucks to get kicked out of CoxCon over a fucking meme, but remember, his right to not be offended does not trump their right to speech. But Sid Alpha and Total Biscuit, and to a lesser extent Jim Sterling, built their channels on ethical behavior. Not legal, but ethical. Is it legal to turn off comments because they don't like what people post? Yes, that's their own rights to free speech in effect. The commenters are still free to talk about them on another platform. But is it ethical? No, I don't think it is. And considering that both Sid Alpha and Total Biscuit devote a large chunk of their channel's energy towards uncovering the unethical censorship practices of other private entities, their own censorship is not only unethical, but wildly hypocritical. This is different than like Angry Joe disabling comments, or Spoonie shitting on his fanbase. Those guys are cunts to be sure, but it's different with Sid, and it's really different with TB. I respected these guys for taking ethical, principled stands against powers far larger than them, and I felt my heart sink when they decided to go down that same road themselves. They can no longer claim to be platforms dedicated to freedom of speech, or any kind of ethical conduct. This is the nature of free speech between private entities. It's not government mandated, but voluntarily taken up as a principled position. And when that position is betrayed, there are market consequences. We see the effects of this nowhere more clearly than in the case of social media. Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, even 4chan all began as principled free speech domains. Even though they're all private entities, they were all held up as areas on the internet where free speech reigned supreme. But over time, with new owners, with companies going public, with tiny policy changes here and there, all of these services became shadows of their former selves. Twitter has implemented draconian measures against what it calls hate speech, and yet has seen absolutely zero growth. Facebook auto-flags for fake news, and still has a hard time staying financially afloat. YouTube just recently implemented a policy of demonetization and isolation for videos it deemed politically controversial, yet still not in violation of its terms of service, but is ultimately still a financial drain on Google. And all of these companies are reaching out to and complying with oppressive governments overseas that seek to have blasphemous, politically active, and skeptical content banned from their platforms. Which is why I personally thought it to be blatantly hypocritical of Google and Facebook and Twitter to come out so opposed to net neutrality during the recent day of action. They seem to be perfectly fine with creating multiple tiers of content, with bending to the whims of religious extremists and suppressive governments, with stifling the flow of information and data to and from a targeted segment of the population, just as long as it doesn't interfere with their own bottom line or operations. And to be fair, I think the free speech argument applies to net neutrality as well. As much as it may go against my own interest to even say it, ISPs, as private entities, should have the right to charge whatever they like for whatever type of service they want, even if it ends up being more money for an entirely inferior product than what we currently have. Everybody's seen this image, I think, of an internet package that looks like a cable TV plan. And yes, this is an abomination, but the ever-present capitalist counter-argument of the free marketplace does apply here too. If net neutrality stopped being a thing, and an ISP decided to actually start running their business like this, how long do you think they'd stay in business? There would almost certainly be an ISP out there that would run things the way they're currently run, at the prices they're currently at, just because it would be so favorable to the consumer base that they would be guaranteed business. I know that the prevailing opinion on net neutrality right now is overwhelmingly pro, and I understand why. Regulation of the internet is partially what's kept it virtually unmolested by moneyed forces in our society, and that's extremely important. But at the same time, stringent regulations of any service by the government can serve to depress innovation and investment. The free market relies on free speech as well. Companies should absolutely be allowed to destroy themselves due to extreme greed, or picking an ideological hill to die on, rather than simply being regulated into submission. There are others to take their place. And just a short aside to Total Biscuit. That's how you're meant to use that quote. Consumers tell their patrons, you will be replaced if you are subpar. Not the other way around, dude. Maybe this sort of thing is why, in game development, DLC is considered to be fucking cancerous, and The Witcher and its devs are treated as the pinnacle of the industry. DLC's always had the stigma of being stuff that should have been in the game proper, that always was in the game proper in the past, but was cut out and put behind a paywall solely for profit. I don't know if that's accurate in every situation for DLC, of course, but I think the example of DLC accurately describes the free speech problem. Governments today are bound by free speech, despite their own dislike of it, and thanks to our ancestors. Back in the day, I presume that freedom of speech was considered to be important, but not all that meaningful. How far could word of mouth really take an idea that the powers that be didn't want spread all on its own? If you've seen Dr. Lehman's video on the myth of the golden era of the press, you'd know that it's very unlikely that newspapers would assist an idea truly hated by the government in gaining steam. Even as recent as 20 years ago, government officials could go ask their pals at CNN or the New York Times or wherever to push a narrative, and the common people would really have no choice but to consume that narrative. But that time is over. The internet's destroyed all of that. The comment section of any video or article, of any political stripe, is full of dissent. The government is challenged, so challenged, in fact, that establishment dandies all across the Western world are seriously afraid of political outsiders. Hate speech isn't really about offense or abuse or bigotry, in my opinion, though that is an excellent secondary point. It's about governments finding a way to compensate for their extreme loss of control over the narrative that their citizens consume. It's about companies finding a way to compensate for consumers rejecting their products due to the boycotts that come about when free speech on the internet allows for real education regarding their business practices. It's about religions finding a way to compensate for the ever-increasing number of skeptical young minds, more than willing to reason themselves out of intolerance, and finding resources and assistance for that journey online. And it's about free speech becoming more valued than ever before in the current zeitgeist, and how people are becoming more willing to turn their backs on private entities that pay lip service to those values, but ultimately betray them. For governments, the free speech problem is in how it is both a fundamental right of the people, while also being the primary reason why they can no longer universally control what those same people consider to be the truth. For private entities, the free speech problem is a conundrum. They hold those rights, just as much as anybody else, but they can no longer use them to exploit with impunity, as the days where ignorance of their actions was widespread are over. And for us, just regular people, there is no free speech problem at all. Thanks for listening, guys. Sorry for the delay on this one. This video originally began as a net neutrality video, and I was writing the script for it around the Net Neutrality Day of Action. But as I wrote, I realized what I was really getting at was freedom of speech. So I ended up putting it on hold for a while just so I could adequately tackle the topic. A very special thanks to all of my supporters on Patreon. You guys are what make this show possible. And if you'd like to get in contact with me, I'm over at twitter.com/shortfatotaku. I also stream, usually about 4 times a week on average, over at twitch.tv/shortfatotaku. And I maintain a Discord as well, where viewers regularly chat it up with me. I hope to hear from you in any of these places. Alright guys, that about wraps it up for me. Thanks for listening. I love you.
At some point this becomes hate speech. At some point inciting a riot plot.
It's called free speech.
No, it's called hate
you
speech.
communist faggot.